Okay, change of plans. This guy is my
as anecdotal evidence.
my local MLA. He's an experienced guy too, right? So we're just going to listen to him for a bit.
Example where there was a legislative impediment to removing someone from
He's
the
a
board
lawyer.
who was either
I actually made this guy turn red in the face. He
He
thought I was a little too aggressive, a little too feisty.
Aside from what I would describe as something close to gossip about someone who
But every now and then I run into him.
May have been a
He's
member of a
kosher,
faculty
you know.
association, and
He's okay.
yet participated in those decisions that might have touched upon the.
It's not his fault he's in a kangaroo court.
Association. And that's a bit surprising because, in fact, these institutions all have codes of conduct and board conduct bylaws that they govern themselves by. And my brief research on some of these, and I'll give you some examples. Camosun College has a board conduct bylaw, which they govern themselves by. They have a code of ethics. It says, and this is probably axiomatic, but to any board, but each member, regardless of whether he or she is elected or appointed or is an ex officio member of the board, has the responsibility first and foremost to the welfare of the institution and must function primarily as a member of the board, not as a member of any particular group. Members of specific constituency groups, such as faculty, staff, or students, may bring forward to board discussions the views of their respective constituency. However, in deliberations and voting, they shall always act in accordance with the best interests of the college as a whole. Board members are expected to act in all times in good faith and with honesty and due diligence. So those are the general provisions. I think that really applies to any board, and that's probably not a surprise. There's a part that deals with conflict of interest. Actions taken, this is again Camosun College, actions taken in the course of performing duties as board members shall neither cause nor suggest the reality or perception that a member's ability to perform or exercise those duties has been or could be affected by private gain or interest. All board members shall ensure that personal financial interests, assets, or holdings are not in conflict with any decision or any other matter that may be heard on or acted by the board, and they shall remain. Personal employment is not dependent on any information or any other decision that may be heard or acted by on the board. They do make an exception for student members in the sense that student members, I'm reading, are not considered to be in conflict on issues relating to fees and charges paid to the institution by students and may engage in the full debate and vote on these issues. Gives the chair some guidelines for handling a conflict of interest. The board chair will examine the agenda with a view to determining potential or real conflict of interest. If the board chair believes there's a conflict of interest situation, the board will advise the individual involved with a real or potential conflict. There may be provisions for the board member to absent themselves. There may be a discussion by the board. If there's a breach in the code of ethics, the board chair, and this is the board chair only, will take whatever action he or she believes is appropriate based on the nature and severity of the breach. Such action may include, but is not limited to, warning, reprimand, suspension from the board. So there's an appeal, and on appeal, and in the case of an appointed member, they may request that the lieutenant governor and council remove the appellant from the board. So there is a very extensive code at this particular institution, and I've got to look at a couple of others as well, that deals with these issues. So the suggestion that somehow there isn't a proper process taking place at these boards, that there are no guidelines, that there's not a recognition of conflict of interest, that somehow one member on the government side was suggesting that members who were members of a trade union or a staff association were voting on their own contract would clearly be prohibited by these rules, and the board chair has a duty and an obligation to deal with that. So the reason that there are such few examples, the minister put forward none, not a single one, nothing. And we rely on anecdotes from others, is because there are no real instances of this. And if there are, let's have them out in the public, let's have them on the floor of the legislature, let's go on the radio talk show, because that's the flavor of the day, and let's expose these alleged conflicts. I dare say that there are none. These boards function very well, and this particular piece of legislation, I don't know where it comes from and why the minister is advancing it, and it will, I think, probably have do some damage to the way in which the boards operate, because it will generate bad feelings and an atmosphere of mistrust. And that's not
right. So how are you going to bring in goodwill when every time you turn the corner, it's just another hurdle you have to jump over to find out that the rules change when you get to the other side?
The board is composed of 8 or more members appointed by the Lieutenant Governor and Council. So that's legalese for the cabinet. So the cabinet appoints 8, and that's a clear majority. There's one person on the faculty of the institution and elected by the faculty members, 2 students elected by the students, 1 person who's part of the support staff and elected by the support staff, the president, and the chair of the Education Council. That's a total of 6. So you really have, one might well expect that the appointed members clearly have a majority, and it's a minimum of 8, so there's an opportunity in the legislation that's permissive to have more than 8. And there are other members on the board who represent different parts of the institution. But clearly they're clearly instructed by the Code of Ethics at Camosun, for example, to put their personal interests aside, act in the interests of the board as a whole, and they're forbidden to decide on anything that directly affects the terms of their employment. So where is the problem? Where is the problem? Where is the problem? Vague insinuation, an attack on people who happen to be members of trade unions and might hold positions of office in those trade unions, but other than that, that's about it. So again, an unnecessary piece of legislation, a solution in search of a problem, relying on anecdotal evidence that the minister herself can't even bring forward in her second reading speech. Perhaps at the committee stage she'll offer these allegedly egregious examples and outrageous conduct that these amendments will deal with, that the boards of directors, the codes of ethics, the collegial atmosphere that runs most of these institutions hasn't dealt with. And so I'll look forward with interest to what the minister has to say at committee stage, and maybe in this session we'll actually get to committee stage instead of having this rammed through enclosure like we usually do when the BC Liberals are sitting in the legislature.
Did you hear what
Most of the bills in the last number of years have gone through enclosure. They really don't like debate. They don't really like committee stage. I mean, that's very clear from their actions in this place, and their actions certainly do speak louder than words. But you know, let's look at other boards. Let's look at the BC Hydro Board, for example. There are people on the Hydro Board, and this was discussed in estimates on Wednesday, May the 9th, with the minister. A hydro director who's a member of a law firm. One of his partners at the law firm is a chair and a significant shareholder in Finnevera Renewables, which has a substantial contract with the BC Hydro. This Mr. Drance, who's a hydro director, was he removed from the board? How was that conflict of interest addressed? Billions of dollars in that contract. No, he recused himself. In other words, he didn't participate in decisions that affected the clean energy call and anything that might be related to the area of business. So at the BC Hydro Board, if there's a conflict, it's good enough, and the minister defended the appointee to the board as a man of integrity, and I certainly don't dispute that here. But that was good enough. That was good enough. That was the legal mechanism. Have that person recuse himself from those decisions and participate in the rest of the dealings and the business of the board. So good enough for BC Hydro, but not good enough for Camosun College. Maybe the minister will be
because
able to explain
it's
that.
the young people that are getting out in the
She'll explain
streets
why
and
there's
starting
one
to
set of
protest the
rules for
draconian
Crown corporations
legislations
and, liberal
that are
appointees,
oppressing
Crown
the
corporations,
majority
and there's
in the
another set of
province.
standards when it comes to
BC Hydro, on the other hand,
whose only interest in the
totally
institution
different
is the
entity.
fact that they work there and are concerned about the future of the institution, and they do not participate in matters dealing with the collective agreement or their own terms of employment, and they want to participate in other decisions of the institution. No, they can't do that. That's prohibited for them. But for Mr. Drance, he can step aside where his financial interest is concerned, but where anything else is concerned, it's good enough for him to continue on the board. Does one smell a double standard here? I think so. I think so. An ill-thought-through amendment. Let's look at the rules of the Board of Governors of Simon Fraser University. The suggestion is made by one of the members here, by Liberal members, that a member of a faculty association would be negotiating on the board, negotiating with themselves. And that's clearly not the case. Let's look at the rules of the Board of Governors of Simon Fraser University. In the section called Conflict of Interest, 9.6, when a person is elected to the board who is or becomes a member of the executive of an SFU union or bargaining unit, or a member of an SFU negotiating committee, that person will be excluded from any committee or board discussion of labor relations or compensation matters. Good enough for Jonathan Drance on the BC Hydro board. It's in the rules of SFU in the manner in which they conduct their business, yet, oh no, we need an amendment here. We need an amendment here. Need to bring down the legislative hammer to try and solve a problem that doesn't really exist. Let's have a look at the University of Victoria. Again, a very extensive code of procedures of the board that guide their deliberations and their conduct. And naturally, there's a conflict of interest and confidentiality provisions. And they say, and I think this is rather insightful, and understandably, universities are complicated places to govern, this clause acknowledges that. And I'll read 5.1 of the procedures of the board at the University of Victoria. And there, the Board of Governors is constituted as described in Part 6, Sections 18 to 34 of the University Act. The Board of Governors of the University has a variety of functions to perform under the University Act. The composition of this board is complex, and it's possible that conflict of duty or interest may arise in the case of any member of the board. And then they go on to identify what should be done if a board member identifies a real or apparent conflict. And further, and I will just quote, further, there's an apparent conflict of interest when there is a reasonable perception that the board member's ability to exercise an official power or perform an official duty or function will be or was affected by a private interest. They have to make full disclosure. And they make, there's a procedure to be taken after the disclosing a conflict. They may ask the board's permission to address the board briefly. They may excuse themselves. They must not take part in the discussion of the matter or vote on any questions in respect to the matter.